Wake up. It's the Sleep Unplugged podcast, episode 123, Fear of the Dark. There's no need to be afraid. Welcome, everyone, to the Sleep Unplugged podcast. My name is Chris Winter. I'm a neurologist and sleep specialist and your host for this episode that I hope will go very well with Halloween, which is coming up Thursday. We did during the first season of the podcast, I think Nightmare and Night Terrors for the Halloween episode, and I thought we would revisit the thematic Halloween episode with one on Fear of the Dark. If you're new to the Sleep Unplugged podcast, welcome. If you're a veteran of the podcast, welcome back. We're glad you're here. It's been a busy week. I was up in Baltimore lecturing, talking to some wonderful sleep doctors in the Baltimore area. Really happy to spend some time with you all. Was also recently in Chicago with, again, another group of sleep doctors working with Avadel Pharmaceuticals. Their narcolepsy medication was just FDA approved in the pediatric population, which comes on the heels of Harmony Biosciences product, Wakix. The Avadel product is Lumryz. Both of these narcolepsy medications finally getting approval for use in kids, and that's really exciting for that community. And we'll definitely talk more about that in future episodes. We'll talk a little bit about narcolepsy today in this episode because there's some interesting tie-ins. If you want to get in touch with the show, it's Dr. Chris Winter Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter Twitter, Dr. Chris Winter uh, TikTok, Bluesky, Threads. We have a YouTube page. We post the video content of all of our shows. And of course, we have the Spotify music playlist. We always talk about a music group or performer. There's always a mention in the title of the show. We put all those songs on the Spotify playlist. So I was telling you, I was out in Chicago. Two things when I was in Chicago. One of my sleep doctor friends said, "Man, I was watching one of your YouTube videos and good work, but you look like hell in it. I think his words were, you're a good looking guy. Clean yourself up." So that was pretty funny. So we were out there in Chicago. And of course, if you're watching on the YouTube page, I'm again wearing LA gear because a team that I work with is now leading in the World Series 2 games to nothing. Knock on wood. They continue that success. Wow, was that Freddie Freeman home run really incredible. So we're really excited for the Dodgers to win because if the Dodgers win, they represent a team paying very close attention to good sleep of not only their team, but also their employees. And of course, on the podcast, we always want good sleep to win. What else? What else? What else? So, comments, corrections, criticisms. We'll start off with a comment from a listener who said, "Hey, doc, I have both sleep apnea and cataphrenia. My doctor recommended CPAP, but I'm only 81 pounds and the air pressure from it is much too strong for me. Couldn't breathe with it when I tried. I wear a mouth guard for my snoring, which has diminished the snoring episodes, but not the cataphrenia." There was some recommendation of breathing and tongue exercises. They've worked to an extent, but not to the point where they're helping me. Thank you very much for that comment. So probably what's happening here is there is a concern that maybe your cataphrenia is happening because of the sleep apnea, which probably explains the push to try to figure out a way to reduce the sleep apnea to see if it affects cataphrenia. We talked about cataphrenia in one of the episodes of our show. I believe it was 60. I thought it was like 68, 69, but I could have been wrong. Anyway, but and sleep apnea is certainly a cause of cataphrenia, but there are certainly others. And so if you do have sleep apnea, treating the cataphrenia does make sense. However, for some individuals, even when their sleep apnea is treated, the cataphrenia persists. And for those individuals who do not have cataphrenia, that can be kind of difficult to treat. It was actually episode 30 was the podcast. Cataphrenia, which is sleep-related moaning. Thank you very much for putting that out there. The title of our show, "There's No Need to Be Afraid," is from Mavis Staple. It was actually Mavis Staples, but she was one of the members of the Staple Singers. This was a group that was founded in the late 40s. It was sort of a family gospel, which eventually became sort of a rhythm and blues band. And they achieved a lot of success. I mean, they accolade upon accolade. They were the songs you might remember that they recorded: Respect Yourself, which is in every rom-com movie. I'll Take You There. The Staples singers were the Staples singers were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1999. They were called the Staple singular singles singers, even though the family were the Staples with an S. So Mavis Staples started recording her own solo albums. I think her first was in '69, and in 2010, she released You're Not Alone. And this album was extremely well received and successful. It was number one on Billboard's gospel. And in the 2010 Grammy Awards, it won Album of the Year, Americana category. And it's just fabulous. It is uh, Do yourself a favor, and when you're home one day and you're cooking and getting dinner together or whatever you do in the evening, and you just kind of need some ambient music to listen to, give this album a try. We'll put You're Not Alone on the Spotify music playlist. We must put on a couple other songs. We will put on Fear of the Dark by Iron Maiden. That was the song and title of their ninth album. And got to put uh, on the Dark Side, which was by John Cafferty and Beaver Brown Band from the movie soundtrack Eddie and the Cruisers, which was fantastic. I love that movie and I love that song. I think it's so great. Just real quick, I love trying to figure out if there's connections between the artists that we put on our Spotify music playlist and David Bowie, who, if you're a listener of the show, you know I'm a big fan. And Mavis Staples, in an interview about 10 years ago, said that she had met David Bowie and was just awestruck by him, said he was, the ultimate musician and the ultimate gentleman. And she was opening for Prince. I think Prince produced two of her albums. I think, guy from Wilco, Jeff Tweedy produced some of her albums as well too. I mean, she worked with everyone, but she never worked with David Bowie. And she met him when she was opening for Prince. David Bowie walked into her dressing room and he said, "There she is, that beautiful lady," in his British accent. And she just fell apart. She couldn't believe that she was meeting him. And she said later on, she couldn't fathom the idea that David Bowie even would know who she was. And her quotation was, you just don't think that certain people know you. She says, "I remember him holding my hand. I didn't sleep at all that night." So Mavis Staples, we're thinking about you. And since I was Chicago, she was from Chicago. There's a lot of interactions there. So she had to be the guest for today. One more quick mention. Maeve, the producer of the podcast, will once again be teaching a virtual yoga class tomorrow or Monday, depending on when you're listening to this. So Monday night, 7:45 p.m. Eastern Time. If you go to IYINY, that's Integral Yoga Institute New York.org, and go to the virtual classes. She's the last one on Monday. It's a level one online class. It's 75 minutes, and it's designed to get you ready to sleep after your difficult Monday, because everybody has difficult Mondays. We did the class last week. There were a lot of listeners, I think, on there, although I couldn't see them. You're kind of blinded to it. But Maeve said, "I saw a lot of people on there, and I bet they came from the podcast." So we want to keep growing this tradition where listeners of the Sleep Unplugged podcast get their sleep ready to go for the week with Maeve's uh, class. So let's get into Fear of the Dark for this Halloween, which is really exciting. I think a lot of people have this fear. I remember having it as a child. It was never really about fearing being in the dark. I didn't like being in dark places where I thought people could hide. The thing that I remember the most was at night having to do something that involved going into our basement. And for a period of time when I was young, our basement in our house was not finished. It would eventually become finished, which strangely didn't help that much. So it was kind of one of those things where you would get to the bottom of the stairs and have to cross a room to get to where the light switch was. And again, it wasn't about the dark, it was about somebody being there in the dark, like somebody had gotten into the house. It was kind of standing there. Like I opened the door to go down and get something, and that spooked the person. So now they're kind of hiding there in the corner, but they're in the room with me. I remember these thoughts when I was very, very little. So we can divide fear of the dark into a couple different categories, and they all have really cool, Latin or Greek oriented names. So true fear of the dark is scotophobia. And scoto means dark, and I believe it's probably there is something scotoma that I believe is an eye term. So when people have migraines, they have scotomas, those little flashing lights that kind of herald the migraine coming on. I suspect that scotoma, it's like these little dark areas in your vision, is derived from the same or origin word, scoto, for dark. So truly fearing the dark would be scotophobia. Perhaps, and then there's nyctophobia, which is the night, fearing the night, which I think is important too. So, in other words, as the sun starts to go down and it's becoming night, you have a fear of that, of the night versus scotophobia, things happening in the dark. And then there's lygophobia, which is fear of twilight. And one of the interesting theories that I read about fear of the dark was that the fear of the dark can be potentially protective. So if you think of humans, we don't see very well in the dark. So we do our hunting and our, foraging for food and whatnot in the day. We're sort of designed to do that. And then we want to hide and sleep in caves and avoid predators in the night because we can't see very well. So some experts feel that to some degree, the fear that we intrinsically have, or a lot of people have, of the dark might actually in some way be a bit protective. And, you know, that fear of hidden dangers that I was talking about, which would be sort of a subgroup of scotophobia, might be something that is intrinsically valuable in humans, because if we have that sort of natural or healthy fear of predators hiding for us, that might actually improve our odds of survival. So when we look at fear of the dark, it is very unusual before the age of 2, because the child has to develop to some degree a sense of danger, a rational understanding to some extent of how things work before that fear can evolve. Otherwise, it's sort of it's irrational to them. It's like fearing the carpet that they walk on. They don't know what it is yet to fear. And so as they get older, that's when those fears start to become expressed. They typically peak around the age of 4. That's sort of the high point of fear of the dark in children. And then there's typically sort of over the next few years resolution. It's an unusual fear to see to some extent in individuals beyond adolescence. So you're getting your teenage years, it's going to be very unusual for an individual to have a fear of the dark. And it's pretty interesting. Back in the 60s, scientists thought that fear of the dark was related to molecules or chemicals that were circulating in the body. This is not unique to fear of the dark. Scientists a long time ago thought everything had to do with humors and chemicals that were out of balance in the body. But in the 60s, scientists conducted experiments looking for molecules responsible for memory. And the thought was that perhaps these molecules could actually uh, be responsible for how rats kind of remembered how to get through a maze or something. So in one experiment, rats, which were normally nocturnal, animals, were conditioned to fear the dark, and a substance called scotophobin was supposedly extracted from the rat's brain. So they were trying to figure out, let's change the memory of these rats. And instead of making them comfortable scurrying around in the dark, we're going to condition them to not be comfortable in the dark. So we're going to create a memory that you should not be comfortable or happy being in the dark. There should be an aversion to the dark. And when they created that, they assumed, okay, we've created a new behavior in this rat, a new pattern of its existence. So there fundamentally must be a new chemical in the brain to facilitate that. So this was the scotophobin that they extracted from the brain. And it was claimed to be responsible for the fear of the dark. Like, because they had generated this fear in the rat, this novel chemical that they produced, they felt like was, hey, see this chemical in this little tube? If we put it in your brain, you will develop a fear of the dark. So the thought was, if we just condition a rat to fear something and extract the chemical, we're actually getting the molecule out that causes it. Well, that was obviously debunked. That's not really how memories work. And generating a unique chemical for each condition or memory that we have. So that was pretty interesting that they had actually done that. So, what causes fear of the dark? And when you look at the majority of causes, they all stem from an anxiety. And more specifically, often a separation anxiety. So, what do we see as sleep experts when it comes to fear of the dark? Put the child in bed, the door closes, and 30 seconds later, 2 minutes later, the child is leaving, saying they need a glass of water, or they forgot something, or they can't find their blanket or their special bear that they need to be tucked in with. So these curtain calls that we often talk about with children are absolutely a manifestation of fear of the dark. Now, a lot of times they're indirectly demonstrating that fear of the dark. I need some more water. Can you please tuck me in again? I can't find my bear. Can you put the bear in with me? My daughter, producer of the show and teacher of the class, had a selection of stuffed animals. There were these twin rabbits called Boo Boo Robbies. There was Buddy Bear, Purple Bear. I mean, there was a whole care. Yeah. So certain animals had bed privileges. Others were resigned to a closet or the top of a dresser, whatever. And sometimes we needed extra friends in bed with us when we were little and things of that nature. So sometimes it's an indirect sort of demonstration. Other times it's much more direct. The child will tell the parent that they're scared of the dark. They need them to check under the bed. They need them to check the closet to make sure that there's nothing in there. So once again, there's fear of the dark, but also fear of people hiding under the bed and people I can't necessarily see. So obviously, the treatment for a lot of individuals with this problem is to create light in the bedroom. And as we have talked about in several episodes of the podcast, episode 23 was on sleep and light. It's better for us as humans when we sleep to sleep in the dark. So the introduction of the light can be kind of a problem. One product I wanted to mention was this nightlight company that I've used their blue blocking glasses for a long period of time, started making this very simple nightlight. You can see it's about the size, I don't know, roughly the size. It's a little bit smaller than the palm of my hand. And what I like about it are several things. One, it on the back, it allows you to change the dimness of the light. So you can start with it being really bright. Later on, you can make it dim. Later on, you can activate it where on the bottom, It's either on all the time, or you can turn it off, or you can put it so it's being motion censored. So this little thing on the front is a motion sensor. So I like the idea of being able to stage the night light with your child. Your child may want to start off with the night light on all the time on its brightest. The other thing, most important thing about the light I forgot to mention was that the light is red. So they intentionally designed it with no blue green wavelengths so that that light is not interfering with sleep. So if the light is on, at least that light isn't necessarily affecting their sleep as much as a full spectrum white night light or something that's blue or something like that. So Swanwick is very interested in light as it pertains to performance and sleep. So I like that. So we'll start off with it fully bright. And maybe we start off, later on, we can, flip it to more dim, and maybe you don't even tell the child, you just kind of dim the light a little bit. And then I really like the motion detector for a couple reasons. One, if the child falls asleep and is no longer moving, the light goes off. So you can reassure them that it's okay if you wake up and the light is off. As soon as you start to move around, the light will come on. What I really like about this light when I've talked to parents about it or kids when we talk to them is the motion detector is not only going to pick up on your motion, but it's also going to pick up on the creature underneath your bed or the one that's in your closet that hides in the closet. Mommy and daddy can't see the monster, but as soon as they leave and go back to the bedroom, it comes out. So I always like to tell children, look, it's not just you that's going to trigger it. It's the monster. So you have nothing to fear. If you're sitting there sleeping in bed and it's dark, that means that there's nothing moving around the room. And if you're nervous and want the light to come on, just kind of reach out of your bed and wave your hand and the light will come on and reassure you. So I kind of like the idea that it's kind of like what we talk about with sound, that if you want to listen to a little music or listen to this podcast before you go to bed, go right ahead. That's fine. But I would like for my podcast to be on some sort of timer. So 15 minutes in, it cuts off. Now, if you're still awake, you could reach over and turn it back on. But if you've fallen asleep, now you're sleeping in silence. Now your child is sleeping in the dark. I looked for adult information about fear of the dark, and it does exist. I just didn't find any great scientific papers about it or any interesting statistics or thoughts about what factors lead to this persisting into adulthood. So, I'll mention one other thing too. There was an interesting case report about some children exhibiting fear of the dark because of a stationary night blindness. It's called congenital stationary night blindness. And what that means is when you or I, assuming you see normally, at least from a light perspective, go from a bright room into a dark room. Now, dark means dark, not pitch black absence of light, but dark room. Initially, as soon as the lights go out, it is very difficult for us to see. But as our eyes start to adjust, our rods are very light sensitive. It's the reason why when you go out in the night sky and you're trying to look for shooting stars or celestial happenings, looking a little bit indirect to where you want to see it is often helpful because even though our rods cannot detect color, they're very sensitive to light. So as our eyes adjust, after a minute or two, we can start to see a little bit and make our way around a room a lot of times. For children who have congenital stationary night blindness, when the lights go out and it becomes dim, they can't see. So that reassuring parent who says, it's okay, we'll turn the lights out, just give your eyes a little bit of time and to adjust and you'll be able to see okay, they may not be able to. And a lot of times parents and physicians can miss this disorder. So this unusual blindness can manifest itself and look like fear of the dark. So what do we do for individuals who have this fear of the dark and they want some sort of treatment? One major way of treating is cognitive behavioral therapy. So, cognitive behavioral therapy, though, generally requires some degree of cognitive insight and sophistication and maturity. So, in order for these things to work, there needs to be an ability to some degree to reason, to tap into certain aspects of our intellect, which is why cognitive behavioral therapy can be very difficult for some adult patients who may not be as able or willing to go to those places. If there's more of an irrational response to the cognitive behavioral therapy, it can be difficult. And we as providers feel that right away. Those are the ones that really test you because they don't have that ability to kind of see the logic of the situation. And that's kind of important when you're dealing with individuals who have that. They have to be able to apply logic and abstract reasoning, which can be difficult for some young people. And again, some older people. I've seen in the past few years many examples outside of sleep of adults that look to me like they have lost maybe all ability to create logical connections between facts and reason based upon this abstract structure of information put in front of them. But maybe I'm the one who's wrong. So cognitive behavioral therapy is one way. We talk about that a lot with insomnia. We're going to do a cognitive behavioral therapy episode about hypersomnia. So patients with disorders like narcolepsy often can benefit from cognitive behavioral therapy. There's also something called acceptance and commitment therapy. And acceptance commitment therapy is really more designed to help an individual create a accepting attitude towards their problem by using cognitive diffusion. So you're trying to diffuse the situation uh, versus sort of the cognitive behavior is restructuring the situation. This acts more to diffuse. So these are two different ways that you can sort of approach an individual with a fear of the dark. And there was a study that looked at, I think, 21 8 to 12-year-olds. So these are individuals that have moved beyond the typical age of fear of the dark, and they're getting a bit older. And so they were randomized to either get a 30-minute cognitive restructuring or a 30-minute cognitive diffusion intervention. And at the end, and 22 got that, 21 got the first. And so when they were done with these two different interventions, subjective fear of the dark and behavioral darkness toleration. And this was interesting. This was a British article, I believe, that their comprehension and fun associated with the interventions were also assessed. So not only did it work, but did you enjoy doing the work? I'm not sure a lot of people really enjoy cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So it's interesting that was one of their endpoints. So both of the interventions, when they were looked at, had a significantly positive impact on the kid's fear of the dark. Now, cognitive restructuring led to more favorable results on subjective fear than cognitive diffusion, but no differences were found in terms of eventual darkness toleration. So, once again, when you start looking at fear of the dark, I find it really interesting. I can't imagine there being a big medicine push for fear of the dark. My kids fear of the dark. What pills can we give them? Now, obviously, there's high anxiety and there's an underlying anxiety disorder that's a very different thing versus insomnia, where pills almost seem to be the norm. But no, I think if you had a child who had a fear of the dark, you would want to sort of help them learn that, hey, there's really nothing to fear here. Easy for you to say, I'm terrified of the dark. So you kind of go through this cognitive restructuring. And I think individuals who struggle with insomnia are kind of going through the same thing. And we've talked a lot about insomnia at times resembling something like a fear of the dark. The first thing to sort of establish with insomnia, kind of like the first thing to establish the fear of the dark is there is nobody in the closet. There is nobody under the bed. So if your intervention is, what can we do to get rid of the person under my bed? It's going to fail because there was never a person under your bed. Just like insomnia, where it's, I need to do something to make sure I fall asleep. You were never not going to fall asleep. It was an irrational fear of the inability to fall asleep. So there are definitely parallels that we see there. So we certainly could have made fear of the dark our Insomnia Monday question, but I thought it fit much better in with Halloween. So that's it for the podcast. I just wanted to touch upon the fact that fear of the dark is out there. It exists. There are methods that we can use to make sure that it's not impacting your sleep. So the fear of the dark, done and dusted. If you have any questions, comments, corrections, criticisms, if you fear the dark when you were younger, if you still fear the dark, let me know. DR Chris on Instagram, DR Chris on Twitter. We'll post the video of the page or of the podcast on our YouTube playlist. We're putting Maeve Stapleton, Iron Maiden, and John Cafferty and Beaver Brown Band on the Spotify music playlist. Sign up for Maeve's yoga class. And until next week, sleep well.